So I've been an active photojournalist. I started my career as a military photographer in the IDF, and later joining Yediot Ahronot newspaper and working with the agencies around the world, having my pictures published in the biggest magazines on the globe. And I think that what this era is really all about, we're talking about photography today, especially in the era of social media. I think that we have to find what is the real value of photography when we talk about photography in times where we have about 2 billion images being uploaded to social media every single day. And how does that reflect on my profession, trying to stand out with my images, trying to tell a story when everybody takes pictures and there's so many images being uploaded every day. And I think that the one thing that really makes a difference is to get an added value to your image that can really tell a story. And so we'll start, I will show you some images trying to talk about this added value. And I think that this is a very good example. When I was sent to photograph, to do a story on women sniper constructors in the IDF, I truly didn't expect to get an image where you see the eyeball of the soldier through the telescope on the rifle. And I think that the best pictures, I can say that in a way that happened by chance. So this is a very good example of that. And when the picture is good and it has an added value, it's being used over and over again, and it really tells a story. So I didn't plan it. I have to admit it was shot in film way before digital photography was invented. And it really turned into an image that was later exposed and shown in so many newspapers and magazines and books. And so there was a very wide exposure for this image. And the true story is that this soldier is probably 47 or 48 by now, because it was shot in the beginning of the 90s. And the reason why I start with this image is truly because if the picture is good, it lives forever. And I think that this is one of the biggest statements I'm going to tell you tonight. And as you can see, it was later published on the cover of the magazine and on books and so on and so forth. I think that the biggest thing, in photography is being a storyteller. I use photography as a way of telling a story, but there's so many. It's not if we take this picture as an example, I could have shot just the portrait of this guy performing, but when you open the frame a bit and you understand, the location and where it's shot, and this guy is so colorful. On the other side of the image, you see the Orthodox man, and it creates an environment and it tells a story, and there's so many layers to it that's really creates the impact of the story that I'm trying to tell. One very important thing in photography is composition. I mean, how do I build my composition? I mean, what do I do in order to make it more interesting? I have to tell you that, I was traveling by the seashore of Tel Aviv. And by the way, everything that we see here is shot here in Israel. So this picture was shot on the seashore of Tel Aviv, and it was, as you see, the sun was coming down. It was a Friday afternoon. And I saw all these guys, practicing Acro yoga. So I stopped, I'm driving a motorcycle. So I stopped the bike and I took the camera that I always have with me. And I'm literally lying on the ground. So the guy that is walking on the rope will literally be above me. So he doesn't block my view of seeing all the people. And this is kind of created a very interesting composition that I have. Again, I have these layers that I have a foreground and I have a background, and the composition is interesting. One more added value that I think I should point out to you is technique. How do I use the technique of the camera to create something which is interesting? This is the night run of Tel Aviv. against what we will probably want to see, the runners, I thought that I should make a frame that we actually don't see the runners. We have this kind of a wave that they're all in movement. The camera is on a tripod, it's a low exposure, and everything that moves basically becomes this wave of a blurred image, and everything that is not in motion is completely sharp. As you can see, the policemen standing in between the runners, they look like they're in the middle of a wave in the ocean. But as you can imagine, it's all runners that are running and being blurred because they're in movement. Again, talking about technique, this is a drill of Yamam SWAT, which is considered to be one of the best units in the world, counter-terror units. They're rappelling down Israeli towers, which until not long ago considered to be the tallest in Israel and the Middle East. And actually there are a few buildings that are topping them now in Israel. But it's pretty high, okay? It's over 250 meters high. It's very dramatic when you are rappelling down and you're tied to a rope like I am while shooting this picture. There's no other way of photographing this. There is no balcony or anything. I have to be on a rope exactly like these guys are in order to take this image. Now, in this situation, I cannot use a tripod, so I have to use the steady of my body in order to shoot in low sync, in order to get the ambient light of the background, seeing Tel Aviv from the top, because if I would have shot it in high speed, the background will be totally black, and then there is no need for being tied to a rope 250 meters high. So it tells a story. Again, I have this, it's built in layers. I see them in the foreground, and I have all of the Tel Aviv city in the back. I think that one very important thing in photography is usage of humor. Again, I'm driving my bike in the center of Tel Aviv. It's Rothschild Boulevard, and I see this rooster picking on the chick in a way. So I stopped the bike and I just grabbed a snapshot of this couple talking, and it's funny. The guy is basically giving out these leaflets to this to a restaurant, but he sat for a minute and had this conversation with this lady, and there was something funny about it, and it tells a story a bit of Midtown Tel Aviv. Again, trying to use a bit of humor. This is again shot on the seashore of Tel Aviv, on the Tayelet. Some funny situations that come your way when you're always with a camera and ready to shoot. An Orthodox guy on a unicycle. Another very important thing in photography is light. How do I use the light in photography? And this is a very good example of that. It was shot in Sderot, which is very close to Gaza, close to the Gaza border. And these concrete pipes were put down because to be used as shelters if Sderot is being bombed by from missiles coming from Gaza. And it turned into a playground. And I was there for a pretty long time waiting for somebody to get in and to create this shadow because just the concrete is not interesting enough. Again, when I'm talking about added value, I try to give some another dimension to the frame by using all sorts of artistic measures. In this case, it's a shadow, it could be reflections, it could be different things that help me make an interesting frame, not just by the subject of the thing that I'm photographing, but to give it another dimension. And this is very clear as well, you know, using the shadow became much more important than the writers themselves. And another thing I will say about this picture in terms of added value, which would be the point of view. I mean, where the photographer bases himself in order to create a picture that will be more interesting than shooting it from a different perspective. This is the water fight that takes place every beginning of the summer, right after the graduation of students. It's kind of a bit illegal, so it's kind of an underground thing that runs in social media, and then youngsters come and they have this huge water fight in Tel Aviv. But we're talking again about additional value. So this is a kind of an ordinary image that tells a story of what I see. But if you really want to make it interesting, there's another way of shooting it. The famous war photographer, Robert Capa, once said that if the picture is not good enough, you're not close enough. So sometimes you really have to get close in order to get a very dramatic image. And I think that really this kind of an image, you cannot get closer than that. Another added value, I would say, would be the decisive moment. Where is the exact split second that really tells a story of what I'm trying to photograph. So this is a great decisive moment to get both of them up in the air. Same here, I've been doing this reportage on parkour jumpers, and I've come down to the beach of Tel Aviv to get an image of them practicing. And the guy was getting up on this wooden pillar and jumping backwards and doing all kinds of stuff. And in one of my hats, I've been, for 10 years, I've been a Canon ambassador. And I've been getting cameras to test by Canon and writing a report to tell them what I think of the camera. And right before I photographed this image, I got a brand new camera way before it was introduced to the public, and it was a very secret camera, and I needed to write a report on it, and it was at the time the fastest camera that Canon launched. And I was asked to write a report, and I took it to test it to see how many frames per second I can get in this kind of movement. And so this is one of the very first pictures I photographed this morning, that morning. But I was really surprised that they picked this image to be the campaign image that's ran across the world with advertising of the camera when it came out. Talking about the decisive moment, this is not a drill. It's a real firing of shells towards Gaza in one of the operations, and but so you see the smoke coming out of the cannon a split second after it fired. But once in a while, you get a good chance to get a picture that you cannot even imagine. I couldn't even imagine getting the bullet itself coming out of the cannon. It happens so fast that you cannot even see it. Only when I was flicking back my pictures after the fire, I saw that I got the round in the air a split second after it left the barrel. Same here. I mean, this is a picture of the Israeli submarine, which is the most expensive and most lethal weapon that Israel owns. I was very privileged to be the first photographer ever to join a submarine and to expose images of this thing. And this is a very nice image just seconds before the submarine goes underwater. So it's a nice illustration to show the submarine, but sometimes things happen, and by chance, the minute I'm going to take this photograph, a dolphin jumps in front of the dolphin submarine. So, and again, this image ran, I cannot even tell you how many dozens or hundreds of times it was published in the different newspapers and magazines around the world talking about the Israeli submarine. I think with that, I will end this session talking about added value. The hardest thing to get in photography is to get the viewer to feel something towards the subject you're photographing. And I think that this is a very, very good example of that. It's the day of the ceasefire when the IDF was pulling back out of Lebanon during the second Lebanon war. And it's a Givati brigade coming out that morning, very early in the morning. And the minute they arrived to the Israeli border, they all stood in these circles that each of them put his hand on top of the head of the soldier in front of him instead of a yarmulke. And they're doing a prayer for the soldiers and their friends that they lost in the war. And this was a very, very emotional moment for me and obviously for them as well. Susan Sontag, which is a very famous philosopher that wrote a lot about photography, once said, she wrote actually in one of her books, that the power in photography is in the fact that the eye is connected to the brain and goes directly to the nerve system. And by viewing a powerful image, we go, as a viewer, we go through an emotional experience. And I definitely think that this is where I try to aim my photography, especially in these kind of occasions. If I do an exhibition and people go through and they come out feeling nothing, I failed with telling the story. This was on a cover of a book I've done with the Friends of the IDF in the US. And this is another example of that. It's the morning of when the disengagement took place, withdrawing out of Gaza that took place in 2005. The soldiers are standing in line in Tel Katifa settlement, waiting for the commander to give the order to go in, to break in the houses and pull out the people that are in them. 5 minutes before, the door opened and a 3-year-old kid came out and giving cookies to the soldiers that few minutes later will pull his family out of the house. So it's not about left or right. It's not about if you're against or with the pullout from Gaza. It's a emotional moment that regardless on which side you are, you understand the deep feeling of the situation. And now we're going towards a book. I came out with Yoav Limor, which is a writer that deals with military subject, for 30 years. We've been together in the army. We've been collaborating and doing news stories about the army since we were soldiers. And he's one of the biggest experts in Israel. So when Israel celebrated its 70th anniversary, we decided that we'll do a book going back and telling the amazing stories we've done throughout the years on the IDF. So the book is basically everything that has to do with the Israel Defense Forces. And it starts with Iron Dome, which is a very important and a key player with all the operations and that we had in the last couple of years, protecting Israel, especially from missiles coming from Gaza. And at some point, eventually, we'll probably have to face the Lebanese border as well. So this was taken during Protective Edge in 2014. And I think that one of the things that I had in mind that I really wanted to show was the interception taking place over Tel Aviv, because this was the first time that they had missiles that were able to reach the distance of Tel Aviv. And what we see here is literally Tel Aviv being attacked by missiles coming from Gaza, and in the interception of Iron Dome that took place above Tel Aviv. So when Protective Edge started, I as a photojournalist, you know, I have to tell a story. I literally moved to live in the south of Israel for the 5 weeks of this. It was an operation, but it's basically, we can say it was a war. So here we see tanks going into Gaza, and here we see another shell being fired towards Gaza. And again, it's the zone is huge, and we travel. We wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning every day, traveling around the Gaza border, trying to find what to photograph that will be strong enough, or, you know, telling the story of what will hopefully be on the cover of the newspaper and magazine the next day. So it's this Sisyphic traveling of hundreds of kilometers every day, trying to find the right location and the right spot to get the right picture. After a couple of, about 2 weeks, I convinced the IDF spokesman that they should get me inside Gaza in order to photograph the underground tunnels, this was the main key story of this operation, trying to block the tunnels and to expose them, to block them, and to blow them up, because it was a major threat to Israel at the time. And the only way to stop this terrifying option of Hamas militants going through the tunnels, there were 32 tunnels that just the apocalypse idea of Hamas terrorists coming through the tunnels at the same time could have been a huge disaster for Israel. So this is the convoy I joined in order to get into Gaza for 24 hours that I spent with the soldiers. This is already near Khan Yunis. This is a house that was, the basement was a place where the Hamas used to dig one of the tunnels that connect to a major tunnel that went all the way into infiltrating Israel. This is a good example. You can see on the bottom right here, you see the entrance to the tunnel. And this hole was dug by Israeli bulldozers 25 meters deep in order to expose the tunnel. And these are the paratroopers that I joined going into one of these tunnels. Basically, these were the very first images of underground tunnels that were exposed to the media by a photographer, which is not a military photographer, by an independent photographer, as a journalist that joined the forces. And these were the very first, very important images that were exposed from that day. Here we go to, this is probably the only image that I didn't literally take because this is an F-16 takeoff. There's only one seat, and unfortunately, the only option was for me to sit on the lap of the pilot, but I didn't mind, but he didn't go for it. So the only way for me to photograph this image was to kind of put the camera in the cockpit and give the pilot himself a remote control that he can literally photograph himself while taking off. And so so we have a mutual credit, even though I cannot tell his name. So I only have the credit for the picture. And going back, this is the Israeli submarine. As I said before, the most expensive and most lethal weapon that Israel owns. Very compact, very small, but very smart. One of the chapters in the book talk about the soldiers being sent to international major disasters around the world to give aid. And I think that it does, besides the fact that it does great publicity for Israel, I think that the fact that Israel is, for some reason, they're the first on the ground to give assistance and to open a field hospital. They're doing an amazing work. This picture was shot in Haiti right after the earthquake 2010. Just to remind you guys, we're talking about one of the major disasters in history. Over 2,050 250,000 people that died in this earthquake in Haiti, and close to 300,000 injured. And Israel, the IDF field hospital was the first to give first aid on the ground and to make operations. And I was there for almost 2 weeks, and it was amazing to see how many lives were saved by the doctors and of the IDF. Moving on to the night raids and fighting against terrorism, something that happened literally almost every night. There's these operations that are done in order to prevent terrorism and to arrest terror suspects. This is a Duvdevan unit, considered to be one of the best units working in the West Bank. This is what is considered it's called a ticking bomb. When the Shin Bet, the Secret Service of Israel, gets information that someone is about to carry a terror attack. And again, this is a Duvdevan unit that were called to the mission, and it's a matter of hours until they got to the house. They found the weapon, arrested the guy, and prevented an attack that could have happened just a few hours later. Exposing a laboratory of creating unofficial guns, again, in Bethlehem, underground, a place that during the day did all kinds of work, CNC job for commercial, and at night were creating parts for rifles and guns. Many of these were exposed by the IDF in the last couple of years. And I think one of the parts in the book which became really popular and very dramatic is the elite units. Here we see the first exposure of the Israeli Navy SEALs called Shayetet 13. I was luckily the first photographer to join their training. Again, what we see in the elite units is only training. Unfortunately, I cannot join them on real live mission for many different reasons. Hopefully, maybe that will happen one day, but we have to understand that most of their operations sometimes are above enemy lines, and this became impossible for me as a citizen to join them. So whatever we see here are images of their training underwater. Amazing unit. And the second unit is Matkal, which is considered probably the most secretive unit in the army. I must tell you that it was a great honor for me to join these guys and to shoot them training. These pictures were shot in 2018, and these pictures are the first ever of this unit by a photographer, again, by a photographer which is not military. So it was their first exposure ever, and that was shot for the book, for a reality book that I just showed you. Obviously, they're the most expert in counterterrorism and do really amazing operations, let's say, very far from home. Okay, and the next thing I will talk to you about in the time frame that we have is the coronavirus. As a photojournalist that feels the obligation of shooting a story when things are happening. When the coronavirus started in Israel, I knew that I have to take the initiative and to do something meaningful. And when I say meaningful, we didn't really know what's going to happen and how big or how bad it's going to be. but I felt that I'm confronting World War III. And I, as always, put myself on the front line. Doesn't matter if the front line is Gaza or mid Tel Aviv. I mean, I have to tell the story, not just because I want my pictures to be in the newspaper tomorrow, but I try to look at it in a perspective of what images will be shown here, in 100 years from now. I mean, how do I create a body of work that will tell the story of what happened here, looking back to 2020? So I approached the Israeli main hospital of Tel Aviv, which is Ichilov, and I convinced them to give me access to photograph everything that is happening. And I started really early, way before there were patients. There were just a few people that were infected with coronavirus, but they were not even sick. There were youngsters that mostly came from abroad. So they're putting together this part of the hospital which was not in use for these youngsters just to see if they develop anything. So it's a very, very early age in the process of what happening. Then they started obviously taking it very seriously, and the hospital is trying to take action in creating parts of the hospital, already preparing themselves to collect people who are getting sick, and they're in total in different zones in the hospital, so other people won't be infected. And they started to create this method of how to put your clothes and masks and everything. Thing escalated very fast to a situation where they had to move very quickly in order to create these special parts of the hospital that will take care of the coronavirus. Obviously, getting the tests and working in an environment which is it's called biohazard, which is can be, we can get infected very quickly. Cleaning the outside parts of the hospital, and again, when this whole thing started, it was very hard to predict what's going to happen next and how big and how bad it's going to be. And I have to admit that I took this assignment on myself. Nobody sent me. It's not I don't need a newspaper or a magazine to tell me that they want me to photograph this. I just understood that it's important enough for me to leave everything and focus on doing as much as I can in order to tell the story of Israel during the coronavirus times. And personally, working in the hospital every day, I have to admit that I was sure I'm going to be infected. I took the risk knowing that it's a risk that I have to take. So I totally kind of disconnected myself from my daughters, from my parents, from my family and friends. And it was either I was working in the hospital or I was home alone working I'm divorced, so I live by myself, and my daughters are coming over 3 times a week. But so I didn't see anybody for a couple of weeks, just coming to the hospital every single day. This is how the hospital, the ambulance is, they're doing this very deep clean of the interior of the ambulance between every patient that they bring that is a suspect of coronavirus. And again, cleaning all the equipment and the ambulance and taking off the uniform and the cover of themselves. What we've seen here is about a week of work. And that at that point, I'm kind of telling the newspaper Yediot Achronot, which I work for, that I'm working on a project that through this hospital, and I'm giving them some of the pictures to kind of show. And this was already on the cover 2 days later on the cover of the magazine on the weekend supplement, and a reportage of the very early stages of the coronavirus in Israel, and telling the story from the perspective of the hospital. From that part on, I start taking pictures all over, trying to find, again, different hospitals, and trying to work with, to shoot, the streets of Israel that are literally it was before it was totally sealed, but you know, people still walk around, but already started walking around with masks and gloves, and very little traffic. You know, people that do come out are with masks. And then I joined MADA, which is the Red Cross First Aid Organization. The driveway that we're doing the test, the coronavirus tests, you know, photographing that. Obviously, I had to ask permission of every citizen that I'm photographing if he accepts the fact that I will take his picture. And obviously, most people said yes. The one that said no, I didn't photograph. But I started having, you know, a lot of publicity of an internet web and on the web of a lot of internet outlets and newspapers and magazines using my picture. Again, going back, seeing the empty streets was something very different in Tel Aviv, and everything was just unbelievable. At some point, it felt like I'm photographing in an artificial city, that I'm alone, and it looks like a movie set or something. It was really crazy. You know, I traveled around and it was just, everything was empty. Again, going back and forth to the hospital, trying to tell, you know, the story through the doctors and nurses working in crazy shifts, 24 hours a day with coronavirus patients. The whole process of how to put on your clothes is easy, but taking off your clothes is crucial, because if you do one step wrong, you can get infected very easily. And this is how at the very beginning, some doctors and nurses were infected with the COVID-19. So there's a process. And here you can see a nurse, regardless of how experienced you are, you have to have a nurse in front of you that will lead you through the steps and stages of what to take off first and do the procedure very precisely. Otherwise, you can easily get infected. So no matter how experienced you are, you have someone to lead you. And the second thing is, you cannot wear all the protection masks and stuff for more than 2 hours, because it's really hard to breathe, and you start getting headaches, and it's really kind of stuck really hard on your nose, and you start feeling dizzy. So in most hospitals, the shifts were between 2 to 3 hours. Then you have to go out to breathe and to kind of rest for a while before going into the COVID-19 area. Again, the communication. This is a picture of me with all the gear, the protection gear. At some point, as you can see, the front part, the back part of my camera is protected, even though nothing goes in and out of the COVID-19 area, but I had to sterilize the camera every time. So, and I covered it with something that I put on my shoes as well. This cover for the shoes I put on my camera, and I kind of seal it the best way I can, but I have to leave the front part open because I still have to photograph. And this is an intensive care unit. We start seeing patients that are really escalating fast and being in a very harsh condition of putting on oxygen, and some even worse on ECMO. So this was the first patient that arrived to the intensive care unit. And again, you know, a lot of coverage in the news. This is Bnei Brak. It's an Orthodox city located really close to Tel Aviv, that the statistics show that there was a huge rate of infection in Bnei Brak. So the city was sealed at some point. Nobody was allowed to enter or leave, and soldiers were in the streets distributing food for a while. It was very intensive in order to cut down the rate of infection of COVID-19. This was a test runway only for Bnei Brak citizens, that ambulances took them from their homes to check for COVID-19 and brought them back home. And again, Bnei Brak became almost empty at the time. And they started doing checks in the city as well. There was a lot of coverage in everywhere for these stories. This is a very interesting picture of even the synagogues were closed. So they opened a Torah book on the pavement just next to the house, and the soldiers that came to distribute food stopped on one of the holidays, and they were reading in the Bible just in the street with all these really unbelievable scenes that took place throughout these times of the coronavirus. And here we see the soldiers distributing food in Bnei Brak. Going to every apartment and knowing exactly who lives where. It was a very complex military operation to get this done. Going back to another hospital, this time it's a Wolfson hospital. You see the communication being done through cameras, and the doctor is literally talking to the patient through the camera. They have speakers so they can communicate without putting all the clothes, the protective clothes, and going inside the unit. This is Wolfson as well. Again, another image of me working inside the unit with, this is in intensive care. And as you can see, the full protection. Going back to the crazy scenes of Tel Aviv being completely empty. And this became a standard that people wearing masks, and you have to measure the temperature wherever you go. Seen people that people were able to leave in a distance not more than 100 meters from where they live. So this couple could not stay at home anymore, and they were dancing. They measured 70 meters from where they live. So they were literally on one of the boulevards, and they're dancing in the street. So I tried to look for other aspects of telling the story from different aspects: the people, the hospitals, the closures, the stores. I mean, every piece of information I can find, you know, the long lines to the pharmacy, every piece of information I can find in order to tell the story of this crazy era. These are doctors that are getting ready to enter the coronavirus area, and you can see me in the mirror. I'm already ready to enter. Intensive care. I thought that this was a kind of a moving image of one of the nurses escorting one of the eldest people infected with corona to his room. This was a Passover dinner. I spent my Passover dinner in the hospital. These are doctors. They were not allowed to sit together. Each got his dinner, and they had to stay in their areas and eat. And these are coronavirus patients inside the coronavirus area, which was, I have to admit, a quite crazy picture that was later published in National Geographic. And this is me being tested. I asked to be tested after a few weeks of that I was working straight and in total isolation. I asked to be tested so I can take my daughters for 24 hours. And the minute I was told I'm negative, I was tested negative, I took a 24-hour off in order to go and spend some time with my daughters. Going back to the hospital, this is Sharon Hospital. You know, very moving event that the guy is unconscious, but you know, the nurse is talking to him and showing him a picture of his family, telling him how much they miss him. This was probably the first hug I've seen in like 6 weeks because we were not allowed. I wasn't able to hug anybody, and you know, nobody was allowed to hug anybody. So I've seen a doctor and a nurse, after not seeing each other for a long time, kind of hugging each other. That was another very moving thing. I have to admit I was quite envy because I thought I could use a hug after a couple of weeks of hard work. This is me going again. I was in a different hospital, different arrangement of clothes. And for the ones who could read Hebrew, it says on my back, Ziv the photographer, Ziv הצלם, before entering the zone of the COVID-19. And then again, that's me working through the cameras that were showing the vault. A lot of exposure to these stories, pretty much all over the world. I got published. This is an evacuation of old people's home that were probably all infected, all being taken to the hospital. Again, this is kind of a collaboration with the Red Cross, the MADA, the Israeli Red Cross first aid organization, that I joined them in order to, when they go and take patients that are sick to the hospitals. I spent long nights doing night shifts to see the staff working at night. So I spent, all night coming back home at 5 or 6 a.m. Again, a lot of exposures to these images that we're taking, mostly the ones that we're taking in the hospitals. This again was a very moving event that they brought iPads for patients so the family can talk to their family members that are hospitalized. This is the Memorial Day that took place without the families, and only the soldiers were there to put a flag and to salute every soldier that's fallen in Israeli wars. The 1 minute of siren that is being heard in Israel on the day of Memorial Day. Citizens came out. They could not enter the cemetery, but they were all standing out saluting and paying respect to the fallen soldiers. This was another NGO that were really amazing. They just came in order to sing outside of old people's home and just standing out with speakers and singing. And all the old people came out of the windows just to give them a bit of a good time because they were very lonely. This is a Tel HaShomer hospital. Patients that this young guy, he's 22 years old. His name is Afik Swissa. He was on ECMO for 5 weeks. The guy was unconscious for a huge period of time, and he recovered and he's home and he survived, which was a real amazing. This is the first time he sees his family after being hospitalized for 8 weeks. And we have to understand that, again, nobody wants to see this, but this is a reality. People die from Corona. And I thought that it really deserves, attention of photographing this. Even though I have no idea if anybody will publish these pictures, but at the end of the day, people die from COVID-19. So these are corpses of people that lost their lives to the disease. And we will end with this session, but I gotta tell you something from my heart. This was probably one of the most moving things I photographed during this crazy weeks. I've been working 24/7, you know, telling the story of the COVID-19 in Israel. Ichilov Hospital was the first in the world that allowed family members to come in and say goodbye to their loved ones that in the hospital they understood that they have no chance to survive COVID-19. Here we see a family just a minute before the daughter goes in to say goodbye to her mother. So they're giving a big hug, and here they're literally doing the heart sign from the other side of the window. And I'm escorting Tova, the daughter, to say goodbye to her mother. One of the most moving situations I was in. They really asked me to join them. They really wanted me to take these photographs. I was really honored to be present in this kind of situation. And here we see her mother. She's half conscious, you know, she understands and she hears what she's talking to her, but her lungs collapsed completely, and they knew she doesn't have more than 48 or 72 hours to survive. So she's holding a phone and showing it to her brothers that are outside. Very moving situation. She kisses her hand and she walks out. And the next thing, they called me and asked me if I can join them and photograph the funeral of Batsheva Vita. So this is the family members that came to the funeral. Really crazy situation, unbelievable. And here we see the daughter that I joined inside reading a speech that she talks about her mother, right during the burial. And this story was published all over, and here we see it, the publication in the New York Times. A few weeks later, I get another phone call, a family again that comes to say goodbye, ultra-Orthodox family. The name, it's Rabbi Rafi Sheinfeld is the patient that is, they knew he can't survive. He have 12 children. And we see two of them here praying for him near his bed. And it didn't take more than 24 hours before he passed away. And again, they asked me if I can join them for the funeral. Here we see his wife and the kids, which was an amazing moment for me to be there with the family. And I was totally accepted. And here they're just all sitting above the grave. It's Saturday night, 2 a.m. They didn't want to wait for the burial for the next day, and he was buried right after Shabbat was out. Very emotional moment. I will end with this picture. After I've done my second test, it was about 2 months into the COVID-19 in Israel. And I was checked negative. It was the day of my youngest daughter's birthday. We see here my daughter, which is on her 4th birthday, saying hi to my mother, which is her grandmother. They could not touch each other, and it was they met through the window. Actually, it's a door. More than 2 months that since they saw each other last. So it was a very emotional, personal moment for me. So this is it. This is where we end our presentation. And first of all, I want to thank you all. It's been amazing for me, and I hope this kind of gives you a glimpse of what's it like to be a photojournalist in an era like this, and trying to tell the story of Israel through these crazy times. Wow, it's still pretty emotional for me talking about it now, because we're kind of so close to the time that this whole thing took place. So first of all, I want to thank you. And if everybody wants to ask a question, that would probably be a good time for that.
Thank you so much, Ziv. That was truly amazing. You know, I felt like also very emotional, like watching a movie, a documentary of you saying, you know, bringing me back to the army time and then to COVID-19 and the personal, everything was truly amazing. And we saw it also in the chat box, people sharing their feelings throughout. Someone even said you're a national treasure to Israel, and I agree with her. I already saw a question from Emily. She asked if you direct some of the photos, or they're all realistic.
No, I never direct any of my my photographs. It's 100% natural, and I think that one of the biggest essence in photojournalism and in documentary photography is being loyal to your subject and giving it as is. And so I never direct, I never pose, I never ask people to do something for the picture. I think that I can tell in a second if the picture was staged or it's the real thing. And I, as a photojournalist, feel the obligation of giving the picture as it is. I would not touch or do anything. And I don't know if you saw, but even if in the picture of the last picture we saw with my daughter and my mother, my daughter is blurred. The picture is not technical wise, it's not really good. But you know, I think it's better to see how my mother is so emotional about it and the picture is a bit blurred than reacting the picture and it will look like it's staged, like they're posing, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. And I gotta tell you one more thing. I have a tattoo on my arm and it says, "I'd rather be honest than impressive." So honesty is the biggest essence in photography from the way I see it. And I think, you know, I want to give my images as honest as possible.
We have another question from Saul Adler, a difficult question. I think it's almost asking a mother who is her favorite kid. He asked, what is your favorite photo ever?
Oh, wow. It's a question I really can't answer. You know, I'm a professional, and that means I photo, you know, just on the COVID-19 project, in 2 months, I photographed between 30 and 40,000 pictures. Wow. So I always look at, and I see my work as a body of work. I never look at it as, you know, one single photo out of the story that I'm trying to tell. So I work in subjects, not in one or, you know, image. I'm always hopefully being proud of the last project I just worked on. So I must say I'm quite proud with the COVID-19 project, especially due to the fact of the great access that I was able to get. Most hospitals in the world did not allow journalists to enter the hospital. Most pictures we saw were distanced, you know, from different places that we got the pictures from, but not really from where the things are happening inside the hospital. So I'm happy that I got a body of work that I feel that is quite complete of telling the story, and not, but it's not about a single image. It's never about a single image. It's a storytelling.
We have another question from Jody Myers. She said she also almost became a photojournalist in the 90s, but she saw some photos about what was happening in Israel at the time, being manipulated by some newspapers. And that's when she decided to change her major to film. Have you ever have your images ever been manipulated or used to tell a different story other than what you saw and were trying to share?
I'm very aware to the fact that pictures are being manipulated. And personally, I work with the strongest ethical code ever. And I'm very strict, not only with myself, but with my clients as well. I mean, the newspaper I work with and the magazines I work with know that I'm very strict about the usage of my images. So yes, my pictures were manipulated here and there, mostly on the social media. The picture of mine was taken and were used in a total different context than it was shot. But I have to admit, I work very hard in order to be in a position where I can tell my clients what they are allowed or not allowed to do. I have to share another fact that I was involved together with the government press office in Israel in order to create an ethical code for Israeli photography, because I could walk away and say, you know, the people are manipulating pictures, I'm going to walk away. But I thought that it deserves a confrontation. And I raised a subject to the government press office, and they understood that we're facing a problem of the ability of using different kinds of Photoshop or different other options of manipulating pictures. And they put together a group of people that we sat together for weeks and created the Israeli ethical code that was later implemented to other parts that are using photography. So I'm not ignoring the fact that pictures are being manipulated. I'm totally being proactive about it and trying to see what can be done in order to prevent these manipulations from happening.
Great. And we have another question. Actually, it's two questions that are very similar, and we'll end with those questions. They're asking about editing your photos. Do you edit, and if so, how do you?
Again, I think it's a natural kind of a step to talk about exactly what I just talked about, working with a very strong ethical code. I don't use Photoshop. I do use Lightroom, and I will work with measures between 5 to 12% in contrast or in brightness or things like that. Not over that. I mean, I will, because sometimes, you know, especially if I want to send when I'm printing images, you need a bit more of contrast for printing. So this is basically what I'll do. I will not touch my pictures. By the way, all the pictures that you saw here are raw pictures of how they came out from the camera, because I just put together a group of images to show you in this presentation. A good photographer doesn't need to use any Photoshop.
Amen to that. I want to thank you again, Ziv Koren, for being with us for this amazing presentation. And stay with us a few more minutes as we conclude the Falafel photo contest. We want to show you all a short video that we've made with all the winning photos. So Ori, if you can start the video.
I'm thrilled to let you know that your photo won the first prize.
Wow, thank you so much.
It's a beautiful moment of a young person who's flying high with the love of Israel.
זה נורא ברור שהיא תמונה מנצחת שיש בה את כל האלמנטים, את התנועה, את הספונטניות, את החיבור לישראל, את הקשר לתפוצות.
I felt a sense of inspiration in knowing that even from afar, there's such a strong connection and bond between Israel and the Jewish people worldwide.
I want to send a strong congratulations to everyone who took part, who sent photographs to Jerusalem, and a special congratulations, of course, to the winner. Mazal tov to you all.
תחרות פלאפים נועדה לתת הזדמנות ליהדות התפוצות, לאלה שנמצאים בסגר, להתחבר למדינת ישראל בזמן שלא ניתן לבוא ולבקר. אנו שמחים על ההצלחה האדירה שהייתה לתחרות הזו.
Thank you. And now, and also thank all the participants. I see some of the participants of Falafim here and join us today and participating and asking questions. So thank you all for making this contest so amazing in such hard times, as we saw also from Ziv's presentation, what was happening in Israel. You know, all the things are getting, you know, a picture. We're home and we don't know what's happening, and now, like, even I see it for the first time, and it's really, really, really crazy. And as promised, we want to do the raffle with the rest of the participants, so you can get also a chance to win a cool prize. So also Rahiya will ask for you to turn on the raffle, and I will announce the winner. So Andre Sena, if you are here, you won. You won a laser keyboard, an Israeli development, and it will be sent to your house. Let's move on to the next winner. Well, this is a hard name to pronounce. I won't even try. It will be like totally ruined for me. So Havi, I think I know who it is. He sent us the picture from Vietnam. Correct me if I'm wrong, and if you're here in the chat. It was a really, really amazing picture of a few people doing the Star of David, the Magen David, with their hands. They were here in a program in Arava, in the Negev. Truly, truly amazing picture. You really deserve it. Let's move on to our last winner. So Adam Echt, you also win a laser keyboard. And thank you everyone again for participating, and thank you for being here for this session today. I just before you go, I want to share with you a session that we will have next week. Everyone is talking now about this subject, annexation. People are saying, have all kinds of different opinions. We don't want to give you any opinions. We're just giving the facts on the ground. We will speak with Gil Hoffman, who is the chief political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. And we'll also do a short and fun quiz. It will be a trivia game themed informative session. When you answer questions here on Zoom through the polls, and Gil Hoffman, the correspondent, will give you the right answer and explain a little bit about the background. It's the first session out of 3 we're going to do in this subject. So stay tuned, follow us on our Facebook page, WZO Diaspora, Department of Diaspora Affairs, also on Instagram, And תודה רבה, תודה Ziv for joining us, תודה everyone.
Thank you so much.
Have
תודה רבה.
a great rest of your week. Bye bye.
Thank you guys.